In the remote village of Wistmere, nestled deep within the ancient oakenwood forest, strange occurrences had become routine. Livestock would vanish overnight, and villagers swore they heard howling from the trees. For years, they dismissed it as wild wolves lurking too close. But one evening, the quiet of the village was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. Myra, a young woman living near the edge of the forest, was found standing at the entrance of her home, trembling and covered in blood. Her brother, Caleb, had disappeared without a trace, and all that was left behind were deep, claw-like marks on the walls of the house. The village gathered, torches in hand, searching for Caleb deep into the night. As the search party ventured into the thick forest, a sudden, agonizing howl pierced the air. Fear rippled through the villagers, but Myra, despite her terror, felt a pull and odd connection to the sound, as if it was calling to her. She stumbled into the woods, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain. She found Caleb in a small clearing, standing under the moonlight, his eyes glowing amber, and his body twisted with muscle and fur. His transformation had only just begun, but the creature within him was awakening. "Myra," he growled, his voice barely human. "It's in our blood. I tried to fight it, but I can't." Myra recoiled, horrified. "You? You're the werewolf. But why now? Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb winced in pain, his form convulsing as more of the beast took over. "It's the curse. It's our family secret. I thought I could control it, but I'm losing myself. You have to leave. Now." Suddenly, a rustling came from the nearby trees. A pack of wolves, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light, emerged from the shadows. But these were no ordinary wolves. They walked with a strange, almost human intelligence, as though they were more than mere beasts. Caleb, now fully transformed into a Hulk-involved creature, turned toward them, snarling protectively at Myra. One of the wolves stepped forward, its eyes fixed on Caleb, and in a voice that was both alien and familiar, it spoke. "You can't escape what you are, Caleb. Neither can she." Myra froze as the meaning of the word sank in. She was not just a witness to her brother's transformation, she was next. Before she could react, the wolves circled closer, their voices whispering to her in a strange, hypnotic language that made her skin crawl. Caleb lunged at them, but he was outnumbered. The pack leader glanced at Myra one last time before disappearing into the darkness with a chilling laugh. Myra ran back to the village, her heart pounding, but deep down, she knew the truth. Her blood carried the same curse. It was only a matter of time before she, too, would transform. The villagers were waiting for her, eager to know what had happened, but Myra couldn't find the words. She looked out at the edge of the forest, the full moon high in the sky, and felt the first stirrings of something dark within her. The howling began again that night, but this time, it came from two voices, and the pack was still out there, waiting for her to join them. The curse had only just begun. The days after the night in the woods passed in a haze for Myra. The villagers, suspecting little beyond a wild animal attack, didn't question her shaken silence. But Myra felt the change. Her senses sharpened the sense of the forest, the sounds of the animals, and even the flicker of fear in the hearts of the villagers became overwhelming. She knew what was coming. One evening, as the moon began to wax fuller, Myra returned to the edge of Oakenwood, retracing her steps to the clearing where she had last seen Caleb. The trees whispered, and every shadow seemed to hold the weight of her brother's curse. But she was no longer afraid. What terrified her more was the growing hunger inside her, a gnawing thirst for something primal. In the clearing, she found him. Caleb, still in his half-wolf form, crouched by the remnants of a deer carcass, his once kind eyes now cold and predatory. He looked up at her with a mix of recognition and regret. "You shouldn't have come," Caleb rasped, his voice rough and broken. "I had no choice," Myra replied, her voice trembling but firm. "It's happening to me too, isn't it?" Caleb sighed, standing to his full, menacing height. "It's only a matter of time. The pack, they want you. They need you to join them. But I've fought it for so long, Myra. I thought I could protect you from it." Myra stepped forward, defiance in her voice. "There must be a way to stop this." Caleb's gaze softened, a flicker of humanity returning. "There is no stopping it. But There might be a way to control it. He turned, pointing to the distant mountains beyond the forest. There's an ancient place, a temple of sorts, hidden deep in the shadow peaks. The legends say that those who find it can learn to master the beast within, but no one has ever returned to confirm it. Before Myra could speak, a cold wind swept through the clearing, and with it came a low growl. The pack had arrived. From the shadows, the wolves emerged once more, their glowing eyes fixed on Myra. This time, their leader stepped forward, an imposing figure, larger and more evolved than human, his fur a dark, silvery gray. He spoke again in that chilling, familiar voice. "You're running out of time, Myra. The full moon will rise soon. Join us, embrace what you are meant to be, or face a fate worse than death." Myra felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, the urge to give in almost too strong to resist. She looked at Caleb, who was poised to fight the pack, but she knew he couldn't protect her forever. "Not from this. I'm not like you," Myra said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I won't be a slave to this curse." The leader of the pack laughed, a deep, guttural sound. "You think you have a choice? Your blood was bound to this long before you were born. You can't escape it, any more than Caleb could. The only choice you have now is how you will face it." Myra clenched her fists, feeling the strange energy building in her veins. She could feel the pull of the pack, the seductive promise of power and freedom. But something else stirred within her, a will to survive, to fight back against whatever fate had in store. "I'll find that temple," she whispered, almost to herself, "and I'll control this, before it controls me." The pack leader's smile faded, his glowing eyes narrowing. "You think you can survive the journey? The shadow peaks are more dangerous than anything you can imagine, and you'll be hunted every step of the way. I'd rather die trying than live as one of you," Myra spat. Caleb stepped beside her, his once wolfen features softening. "If you go, I'll go with you. We'll find the temple together." The pack leader growled in warning, but Myra stood firm. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice filled with determination she hadn't felt before. The leader snarled, "You will be." With that, the pack melted back into the trees, their presence lingering like a dark promise. Caleb turned to Myra, his eyes filled with worrying. "The shadow peaks are far," he said softly, "and the next full moon is only days away." "We don't have a choice," Myra replied. "It's either the temple, or I become like them." As they began their journey toward the mountains, Myra could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her. The moon would rise soon, and when it did, she would have to face the monster inside her. But what waited for them in the shadow peaks? And could the legends of the temple truly offer salvation, or was it all just another trap? The wind howled through the trees, as if mocking their hope. The real danger was only beginning, and the wolves were still watching. Myra and Caleb traveled through the dense forest, the towering shadow peaks looming ever closer. Each night, the moon grew fuller, and with it, the beast inside Myra stirred. She could feel the claws of the curse scratching at her soul, trying to claw its way to the surface. Caleb, struggling with his own transformations, guided her as best as he could, but both of them knew their time was running out. On the third night, they finally reached the base of the mountains. The ancient, weathered stone steps led upward into the mist, vanishing into the dark clouds that clung to the peaks. Caleb hesitated. "The stories say the temple is guarded by things, creatures far worse than the wolves. We have to be careful." Myra nodded, though her mind was clouded by the growing hunger, the pull of the moon. She could hear it now, a voice inside her head, whispering promises of power and release if only she'd give in. But she couldn't. Not yet. They ascended the narrow, crumbling path, their footsteps echoing through the mountain pass. The air grew colder, and the wind howled with a voice that seemed almost human. Strange shadows flitted through the mist, watching them, but never revealing themselves fully. After hours of climbing, they reached a large stone doorway, half buried in the mountainside. Carvings covered its surface, ancient symbols depicting wolves, moons, and humans twisted into monstrous forms. The entrance was dark, and an eerie silence hung in the air. "This is it," Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. Myra took a deep breath, stepping inside. The temple was vast, its stone walls lined with skeletal remains, bones of those who had come before and failed. In the center of the room stood a large altar, and behind it, a figure cloaked in shadows. It was hunched, impossibly old, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Who seeks the gift of control? The figure rasped, its voice dry like old leaves. Myra stepped forward. I do. I want to stop the curse. To control it. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. You think you can tame the beast? Many have tried. All have failed. I'll succeed, Myra said, more to convince herself than the figure. I have to. The creature's lips curled into a grotesque smile. The price is steep. Are you prepared to pay it? Caleb stepped forward, his body trembling from his own struggle with the curse. We'll pay whatever it takes. The figure gestured toward the altar. One must die so that the other may live. The bloodline can only be severed with sacrifice. Myra's heart sank. What? What do you mean? To control the beast, one of you must die. The other will inherit the curse fully, but with the power to command it. Myra's mind reeled. She had never expected this. Caleb's eyes met hers, filled with sorrow. I'll do it, he said softly. I've lived with this curse for too long. You deserve a chance. No, Myra shouted, her voice breaking. We'll find another way. There has to be another way. But the figure merely laughed, a dry, haunting sound. There is no other way. One must die. Choose. Myra's breath came in ragged gasps. The curse inside her was roaring now, clawing at her consciousness, and she could feel her body beginning to change. She fell to her knees, her vision blurring. Caleb was beside her in an instant, pulling her close. Let me do this, he whispered. It's the only way. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. But deep down, she knew he was right. The curse was too strong. If they didn't act now, it would consume them both. Before she could protest further, Caleb rose and walked toward the altar. He placed his hands on its cold surface and turned to face her one last time. Take control of it, Myra. Don't let it destroy you. With a swift, terrible motion, the shadowed figure raised a hand, and Caleb's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Myra screamed, the pain of the loss ripping through her heart as the curse surged through her veins. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the voice inside her head went silent. The hunger, the rage, it was all gone. She stood, feeling a strange calm settle over her. The beast was quiet now, and she could feel its power, but it was no longer fighting for control. The shadowed figure stepped closer, its glowing eyes fixed on her. You are the last. The curse is yours alone to bear now. Myra looked down at Caleb's body, cold and still on the altar. She had what she wanted control, but at what cost? As she stepped out of the temple, the wind howled around her, carrying with it a familiar sound. She froze, her blood running cold. In the distance, from the dark forest far below, the eerie howling of wolves echoed through the mountains. But it wasn't just wolves. It was Caleb's voice, twisted, broken, but unmistakably his. He was out there now, somewhere in the dark, cursed to roam the wilderness as a mindless beast. And she knew, deep in her soul, that he would come for her. Soon,